Hallelujah.
You believe in me, Thomas, because you have seen me. Happy those who have not seen me, but still believe. Alleluia.
Hallelujah. 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 The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Thomas, who was called the twin, was one of the 12. But he was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But Thomas said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again gathered in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then Jesus said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hand. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to Thomas, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." The Gospel of the Lord. Aside from Judas Iscariot, there is no other apostle that is spoken about negatively like Thomas. Every time the name Thomas is mentioned, we don't remember any other thing about Thomas except that we call him the doubting Thomas. Even when we are engaged in conversation with friends and they express doubts, we say they're behaving like Thomas. The expression doubting Thomas is so popularly used that seems to be the only thing we remember about Saint Thomas. But Saint Thomas is a saint. He was one of the 12. And he should not just be characterized by that one simple statement that he made that was considered an error. The other aspects of his life should be looked at. And so today, I want us to look at 3 aspects of the life of St. Thomas that is worthy of emulation. Let's just limit ourselves to today's gospel, which is from John chapter 20. When Thomas was thinking about how people think today. Now, over 2,000 years ago, science was not a big thing. But Thomas already had a scientific mind, which is called empiricism. The word science actually means seeing is believing. That's what science means, like omniscience. I have to see to believe. And that was what Thomas was saying. Thomas said, unless I see the mark in his hands, and I also put my finger in those marks, I refuse to believe. Like I said, that's what science means today. Performing experiment. It has to appeal to my senses. I have to touch. I have to see. He says I have to see and I have to touch. Today, very many of us live like Thomas. But Thomas was simply expressing a fact. He saw Jesus crucified on the cross. He saw him buried. And 3 days later, the 11 told Thomas, we have seen the Lord. Thomas said to them, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. And we can't blame Thomas. We cannot. Even you and I will say the same thing if we were in his shoes. When Jesus appeared, Thomas was not there. And they said, we have seen the Lord. He says, I'm not going to take your words for it. I want to see for myself. I want to touch. And I want to put my fingers in those pains. He calls it the nail, the marks. And he specifically mentioned 2 marks. He said the marks in his hands and in his side. And then Jesus, a week later, Jesus appeared. And Jesus invited Thomas. Now, we say, how did Jesus know that Thomas doubted? Because Jesus was not there when Thomas was putting up the arguments. How did he know? So the text says, Jesus came and stood among them. After he said, peace be with you, then he invited Thomas. And he says, put your finger to my side and to my hand. In our Catholic spirituality today, that's what we experience every time we receive Holy Communion. It's called the Thomas's experience. Every time the Holy Communion is placed in our hands, we have the opportunity to touch the pains, the marks on his hands and on his side. So he said to Thomas, come and experience the touch. And Thomas came forward, and then he touched his hands, and Jesus opened his side, and he touched his side. You know, in spiritual theology, those 2 marks, the marks on his hands, where blessings flows from. The blessings comes from the hands of Jesus. And then the side, the heart of Jesus, that the water and blood that flowed from the heart of Jesus. You know, when we celebrated the Sacred Heart of Jesus, we talked about the heart of Jesus, the compassion of Jesus. So Thomas experienced a blessing, and he experienced the compassion of Jesus. Jesus did not judge him. You know, one spiritual commentator said, we should learn from how calm. Jesus did not blame Thomas for doubting. Jesus did not say, even you refuse to believe. He didn't say that. But one interesting thing that Thomas gave the world is what Thomas said after he touched the hands of Jesus and touched the side of Jesus. One commentator said, Thomas, when he touched those marks, now we are talking about wounds that were still there after 3 days. It was not as if those wounds, after Jesus resurrected, it was not as if those wounds were blocked already. In spiritual theology, we say they are healed, but the marks are still there. And so one spiritual commentator said that when Thomas touched those wounds, something happened in his life. And what did he do? He bowed before Jesus, and for the first time, he called Jesus God. You see, before now, anybody who called Jesus at all, even yesterday we read about the demons. They called him Son of God. When Peter made a confession of faith, he said, "You are the Messiah, the Son of God." But Thomas was the first to call Jesus God. Now, when we read it in English, it doesn't make a lot of meaning. But in the Hebrew language, he called him Yahweh. That is the name of God, the sacred name of God. He says, "My Lord and my God." He calls him, "You are Jehovah, you are Yahweh." When he touched him. And that experience is what we are called to have when we receive Holy Communion. We have that opportunity to have the experience of Thomas. Our faith should come alive, and we too should be able to say, "Jehovah Yahweh, my Lord, my God." In Catholic spirituality, what we call popular piety, Thomas left us the prayer that whenever the host, the body of Christ, is lifted up, we bow our heads and we say, "My Lord and my God." When the chalice is lifted up during Mass, we bow and we say, "My Lord and my God." And so that thing that Thomas felt when he touched the hands of Jesus and touched the side of Jesus propelled him to work harder. We in church history, we say Thomas went farthest than any of the 12. If you went to India and you went to one of the regions of India that's called Chennai. In Chennai, like the southwest of India, Thomas ended up there. Thomas is worshipped in Chennai, in India, as he brought the gospel as far as India. And that was where he died. That's where he was martyred. And later, they exhumed his body and they took it back to somewhere in Naples, so where he was reburied. But Thomas became so convinced about the power of God that he became an itinerant preacher and went far east to go preach Jesus there. So let us ask for his intercession today and always, and let us learn from him. Let us learn the faith. Thomas became convinced in the resurrection of Jesus, which he doubted. He became more convinced than anybody. You know, like we say, Paul walked in Europe. That's where Paul did his ministry. You know, he went to Greece, Athens, and stuff. But Thomas went farther and ended up in India. Let us ask for his intercession in our own faith journey.